The day I first arrived on the island, the salty scent of the sea filled my nose as the rowboat eased against the dock. It was the kind of smell that saddens you and frees you at the same time. I picked up my small wooden suitcase, drew a few slow breaths, and gazed at the long stone stairway stretching before me. The lighthouse waited at the top, patient and unhurried, built from gray stone that looked as though it had stood there for centuries. There were 30 steps. I counted them as I climbed. With each one, I felt a little lighter, as if the noise of the city I had left behind, the rush, the crowds, the clatter, was falling further and further away. On the 3rd step, a seagull cried somewhere in the distance. On the 7th, a cool, sweet wind pressed against my face. On the 15th, I saw the sea for the first time in full, blue-green and boundless, glittering like broken mirrors scattered across the water dot. The cottage door was unlocked. When I stepped inside, the smell of an old stove, sea salt, and aged wood greeted me all at once. Everything was in its place. The previous keeper had left as if he planned to return the next morning. On the table sat a logbook, a small pencil sharpener, and half a candle burned down to its middle. I sat down by the window. The sun was sliding westward, leaving a long golden trail across the surface of the water. Waves came quietly to shore, one following another, taking their time, never rushing. It was in that moment that I understood what this island was trying to tell me. That time moved differently here. That first evening, I sat on the stone threshold of the cottage and counted the waves. I counted to 100, then started again. Each wave sounded a little different from the last. Some whispered as they approached. Some made a hollow, satisfying sound when they met the rocks. Some dragged the pebbles back as they retreated, leaving behind a soft and musical hiss. Night came gradually. The sky turned orange, then violet, then deep navy blue. Stars appeared one by one, shyly at first, the brightest ones leading the way, then all the others following. I had never seen stars like these in the city. Out here the sky seemed larger, deeper, more real. When I think back to that first night, I still feel warmth inside. The lighthouse made sure I never felt alone. There was the sound of the waves, the sound of the wind, and far away, the small, steady light of a passing boat. And I sat there in the middle of all of it, hunched over my journal by a single candle, trying to find words for something that had no words. Asterisk. For the entire first week, I woke at the same hour every morning, before the sun had risen, while the sky was still its deepest shade of blue. Something woke me, perhaps the lighthouse itself, or perhaps the rhythm of the waves shifted at dawn in a way I could not yet name. But every morning when I opened my eyes, there was a moment of forgetting where I was. And then I would see the sea through the window, and something in my chest would open. The work of a lighthouse keeper was more demanding than I had imagined. Oiling the mechanism, cleaning the lens, checking the equipment, managing supplies, keeping daily records. But I never complained about any of it, because each task tied me a little more firmly to this island. Every morning when I climbed the tower, when my legs burned on the narrow stairs, when I stood at the top and looked out in every direction, I did not feel that the island belonged to me. I felt that I belonged to it. At the end of the first week, I saw the signs of the first storm. The color of the sea changed, shifting from deep green to a steely leaden blue. The waves rose a little higher and moved a little faster. The seagulls pulled away from the shoreline. I watched all of this and checked my lantern, oiled the gears, and latched the windows shut. The storm came at night. While the window panes trembled and the wind howled and looped around the cottage, I sat by the stove drinking tea. Strangely, I was not afraid. Instead, listening to the voice of the storm, I found a kind of peace inside myself. It was as if nature was releasing its tension, purging itself, becoming clean again. And I was there to witness that cleansing. Even in the most violent hour of the storm, the light never went out. I was on watch in the tower. If a ship appeared in the distance, I would signal them. But no ships passed that night. There was only the sound of the sea and the wind and the steady, reliable sweep of the lighthouse beam. By morning, the storm had quieted. I walked down to the shore and gathered what the waves had brought in overnight. A piece of timber, an old rope, a few shells, a glass bottle. The bottle had nothing inside, but I placed it on my table anyway. Perhaps someone on a distant shore had sent it off into the water with some quiet hope. Who could say? Over time, a morning ritual took shape. Everything flowed in a slow and settled order without hurry. First, I would open my eyes and lie still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. There was a small crack running across the plaster, thin and harmless, formed over many years. Beginning the day by looking at that crack became something I looked forward to. A sense of continuity. Then I would rise and open the window. The sea was always there waiting, looking the same in some ways, but entirely different in others. Some mornings it was calm, perfectly flat, a mirror. Some mornings it was restless. Some mornings it was wrapped in morning mist, pale fog drifting low over the water. Each dawn was a different painting. Then I would make coffee. There was no electricity on the island. I had a small gas stove, old but faithful. You would set the copper pot on the flame and wait, and the smell would slowly fill the room. That smell, fresh coffee mingling with sea salt in the morning air, was for me the finest morning scent in the world. I would take my cup and sit on the stone ledge outside the cottage, looking out at the water. Sitting still and doing nothing no longer made me uncomfortable. In the city, stillness would trouble me. My mind would always produce something that needed doing. But here, sitting was itself an act. Watching, listening, feeling. Sometimes seagulls would come near me. One in particular, a bird with a small dark mark on its left wing, would approach as if it recognized me. I gave it a piece of bread one morning, and after that, it came every day. I gave it a name, Captain, because when it glided against the wind with that marked wing, it soared with the grace of an old sea captain. After the coffee, I would walk the perimeter of the cottage and make sure everything was in order. Then I would climb the lighthouse for the daily inspection. The stairway was narrow and spiral, 35 steps. Every morning my breath shortened on the way up. But my reward was always waiting at the top. The sea, from 70 meters above. One of the greatest things this island taught me was that the sea has no single color. When I lived in the city, the sea meant blue to me. Blue, or perhaps a greenish blue. But it is far more than that dot at dawn. The sea would catch the pinks and oranges of the sky and seem to burn. Not water, but liquid gold in those early moments. Just as the sun crested the horizon, the first light would touch the tops of the waves, setting them alight and then quickly fading. Another wave inheriting that brief fire dot as the morning deepened. The sea would settle into a clear and open blue, crystalline and calm. In the shallows, it was nearly transparent, and you could see the sandy bottom below. In the deep stretches, it was navy, almost dark. In these hours, the fish rose to the surface, and the seagulls dove for them at midday. With the sun directly overhead, the sea was at its most dazzling. A blinding shimmer of broken light, millions of tiny points of brightness all at once. You could not look for long without your eyes watering. But from the top of the lighthouse, gazing toward the far horizon, sea and sky would meet at a point, so soft and blurred that you could not tell where one ended and the other began. In the afternoon, the sea would grow heavier. The blue would deepen, a trace of gray mixing into the green. The waves would swell a little larger and arrive at the shore with a little more intention. These were the hours when the sea seemed most powerful to me that evening, though, was when everything transformed. As the sun lowered toward the western horizon, all those colors spilled out across the water. Orange, yellow, pink, violet. And the sea received those colors, rippled them, bent them, and gave them back to us. To sit on the shore in those moments was to be inside a painter's canvas. After dark, the sea turned black. But this darkness was never frightening. If there was a moon, it left a silver trail across the surface, a path leading somewhere far away. If there was no moon, the stars reflected in the water, and sky and sea became one single piece of dark velvet. Asterisk, asterisk. Few visitors came to this remote island. But when they did, each one arrived carrying a story. One morning I saw an old fisherman on the shore. He had brought his small boat to the rocks and was mending his net. I walked down and said hello. His name was Yusuf, somewhere in his 80s, most of his teeth gone, but his smile still warm. He had passed this island 30 years before and still remembered seeing the lighthouse light. We sat together on the shore and drank tea, and he spoke of his life at sea while I spoke of mine in the city. We both listened to each other with something close to wonder. A young couple arrived once on a small sailing boat. They had come ashore without permission and apologized quickly. I gave them fresh water and let them rest for a while. They had set out to sail around the world, selling their house, leaving their jobs behind. They were making their way through the Mediterranean first, then crossing the ocean. "Are you not afraid?" I asked. The woman smiled. "We set out because of fear," she said. It took me a little while to understand what she meant. The strangest visitor was a boat with no captain. One early morning it was simply there at the shore, with no sign of damage, a full tank of fuel, and coffee cups sitting inside as if someone had just stepped away. I never learned who had left it. It waited at the shore for several days. Then one morning it was gone, as quietly as it had come. On the days when no visitors came, I sometimes held imaginary conversations. I would take inspiration from books, from the sea, from the lighthouse itself. What would Sinbad have thought if he had stopped here to rest? Or Ibn Battuta? I would think about their journeys and feel the smallness of my own world, and somehow the feeling was not shrinking. It was comforting. Asterisk, asterisk. For a lighthouse keeper, the most sacred moment of the day is lighting the lantern as darkness falls. Over the years, I did this thousands of times. But I felt the same quiet excitement every single time. The lighthouse was not automated. It was an old mechanism, rotating, running on fuel. Each evening I would write the time in the log, the moment the light first came on. Then I would descend the stairs and step outside, look up from below, and make sure the beam was turning smoothly. It is difficult to explain the weight of a lighthouse beam. That light was making a promise to every vessel moving through the dark. The shore is here, you are safe, the way is clear. A simple light, but with so much meaning behind it. I would sometimes think about how many captains had spotted that beam and taken a slow, relieved breath. How many sailors had looked toward it and felt that they were nearly home. One night the lantern went out, a mechanical failure. I repaired it within hours, but those few dark hours left a tightness in my chest. I felt needlessly guilty, as if every sailor at sea was in danger during those moments. It was not rational, perhaps, but that is what a sense of responsibility feels like. Over time, the rhythm of the light became my own rhythm. With every rotation, my breathing aligned with it. Every 12 seconds, I could feel the sweep of the beam from across the island. Even if there had been no other clock on the island, the lighthouse would have taught me time. Asterisk lighthouse keepers were required to keep a logbook. Weather conditions, sea state, passing vessels, notable events. But over time, I went further than that. I began writing my own thoughts as well. The first things I wrote were mostly observations. Brief, factual, almost official. Wind from the north, 2-meter swells, 3 fishing boats passed. But as the days accumulated, the entries grew longer. The seagulls drifting today without a single wing beat into the headwind, effortlessly carried, filled me with a kind of longing. I wished people could move through the world that way too. Not with the current, but not straining against it either. Just gliding. Writing was thinking, for me. When an idea began circling in my mind, I could not settle until I had set it down on paper. And once it was there on the page, it became both clearer and somehow released. It would stop looping through my thoughts and wearing me out. Years later, reading those logbooks again, I could see my own changes. The person writing in the first months had just arrived from the city, still adjusting, still finding his footing. Restless, questioning, occasionally unsettled. But as the months passed, the writing changed. Calmer, shorter, more honest out on one particular day. I had written this. Nothing happened today. In the past, that sentence would have filled me with unease. Now it fills me completely. When autumn arrived, the island changed. It was a slow, quiet change. First the air sharpened a little. Then the color of the sea grew heavier. Then the wind shifted direction. The seagulls began making a different sound, longer, more drawn out, as if calling toward something far away. The winter preparations began. I inspected the cottage, checked the roof tiles, stacked firewood against the outer wall. I restocked my food supplies. The supply boat came irregularly in winter, sometimes arriving 2 weeks late. I woke early on the morning of the first snowfall. When I opened the window, everything was covered in white. The sea was still its deep shade of blue, but the coastal rocks, the cottage roof, the stone walls were all blanketed. The scene was so unfamiliar and so beautiful that I simply stood there looking for a long time. Winter storms were another thing entirely. Summer storms were powerful, but passed quickly. Winter storms could last for days. The wind would pound the walls of the cottage, the window panes would shudder, and the sea would throw itself at the shoreline like white-capped giants. Inside, wrapped in a thick blanket by the fire, I would read or write in my journal. Even in the most violent hour of the storm, the lighthouse had to keep burning. This was both a rule and a matter of personal honor. No matter how difficult things became, the thought of letting the light go out never once crossed my mind. On the contrary, on stormy nights, I climbed the tower more often, not less, to make sure everything was holding. The length of winter nights was difficult at first. Dark by 5 in the evening, light again by 8 in the morning. 15 hours of night. But in time, I came to love these long nights. There was ample time for reading, for thinking, for listening. And when the lighthouse beam swept across my wall at its steady interval, that rhythm gave me a strange and particular peace that in winter I had Wentril I kept without fail. Every Wednesday evening I would make a large mug of spiced tea, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, a little dried orange peel. I had the supply boat bring these spices specially. I would look forward to that Wednesday evening all week. I would take the mug outside and sit on the stone step at the cottage entrance. Even in winter, my heavy coat on, a blanket around my shoulders, the warm mug in both hands, looking up at the sky stars in winter, or something else entirely. When the air was cold and clear, the sky became almost crystalline. Orion, the Great Bear, Venus, I had learned to find them all. Sometimes a shooting star would cross the sky, drawing a white line across the dark. In those moments, I never knew what to wish for. I already had everything I needed, the scent of spiced tea and the brilliance of the stars. When those two things came together, I felt what a simple life could be, how beautiful it was. After years of chasing big cities, big ambitions, big achievements, how deeply I must have been longing for this simplicity all along. One Wednesday I noticed a light in the sky, moving slowly. I first thought it was an aeroplane, and realized it was moving far too slowly for that. A satellite, it must have been. Up there orbiting in silence for years, always on the same path, never complaining, never asking to stop. There was a kind of faithfulness in that. Like a Lighthouse Dr. One away message in a bottle one spring morning, I found a bottle on the shore. This time there was paper inside. I worked the cap loose carefully and drew the paper out. It had been touched by moisture, but was still readable. The writing was not in English, but I could make out a few words scattered through it. A date 7 years before my finding it, and a drawing, small and careful, a little boat surrounded by large waves, and beside it a figure of a child. At the bottom of the page, a name, Marco. I will never know who Marco was. I do not know where he sent the bottle from, or why he sent it, or what he was trying to say. Perhaps he was a child, perhaps a grown man. Perhaps he was sad, perhaps overwhelmingly happy. Perhaps he never wanted anyone to find it, only for the bottle to drift forever in the deep. I cleaned the bottle carefully and kept the paper tucked safely away. And that same evening, I wrote my own message. I wrote the name of the island, the date, and just a line or two. Hello to anyone passing through these waters. May you have enough wind and enough peace. I put the note in the bottle and set it in the sea at the last light of evening. I never learned where it went. Perhaps it washed up on a fisherman's shore. Perhaps it sank into the deep. But in the moment of letting it go, I felt a quiet invisible thread between myself and Marco. Two strangers, two different points in time, the same sea. Sleep was different on this island. In the city, sleep was sometimes hard to reach. Noise, unfinished thoughts, tomorrow's tasks, yesterday's mistakes. The mind would not be still. But here, once the sound of the waves began, there were nights when I was asleep before a single thought could form. The sound of waves was like a lullaby. Steady and calm, never stopping. One came, one went, one came, one went. That rhythm loosened the body, emptied the mind, and drew you slowly inward into yourself. On windy nights, the sound changed. The waves arrived larger, louder, with more presence. But even this did not disturb. If anything, it brought a deeper sleep, as if nature was singing a bigger lullaby on those nights. Sometimes at night, I would leave the cottage and walk down to the shore. I would take off my shoes and press my feet into the wet sand. That feeling, cold and soft and damp beneath my soles, would spread a kind of peace through my whole body. The waves would touch my feet, pull back, return again. On such nights I would sometimes lie down on the sand by the water's edge. Stars above, earth below, the sound of the sea all around. Finding words for those moments is nearly impossible. You felt very small, but never alone. You were a part of the universe, small but real, no less real than anything else. Asterisk years went by. I began to notice the gray coming into my hair, slowly, when I looked in the mirror. Small creases appeared on my hands and multiplied. But inside, I felt no age. If anything, as the years passed, I felt lighter, not heavier. One year, during a violent storm, I fell on the lighthouse stairs. My wrist was broken, and I sent out a call for help. A helicopter came. I spent 2 weeks in hospital, and those 2 weeks felt like years to me. The cold fluorescent light of the hospital corridors, the noise of the city outside, the relentless distraction of everything. When I finally returned to the island, when I heard the sound of the waves for the first time again, my eyes filled with tears. Asterisk, there was also a winter when I fell seriously ill. A bad flu, a high fever, a deep exhaustion. For days I could not rise from bed. The supply boat was late that season, and there was no one with me. But I noticed something strange during that illness. The sound of the waves never stopped. Even lying there with a fever, that sound was present. Constant, reliable calm. As if something was sitting with me. When I recovered, I looked out at the sea with a full feeling of gratitude. The sea was not smiling, of course, but I felt that it was, that day. Gratitude works in that way sometimes. You can feel it toward the simplest things, a sound, a light, a presence. Over the years, the island became a part of me. Or perhaps I became a part of it. Both were true. I knew the shape of every rock along the shore. I knew which sound a certain wind direction would make. I knew which shadows would fall at which hour of moonlight. I could read this island like a book asterisk. One day the time to retire arrived. A young keeper was coming to take over the island, and I would guide him for a few days before leaving. I had long imagined that final day would be unbearable. But when it came, I felt, strangely, at peace. On the last evening, I did everything one final time. I made my coffee, sat at the stone ledge, and looked out at the water. I watched the seagulls. Captain was still coming, that bird with the marked wing. Whether it had aged, I could not tell. It always looked the same to me. As the sun set, I climbed the lighthouse tower for the last time. I felt each step beneath my feet. At the top, from 70 meters above, I looked in every direction. The sea, the sky, the distant silhouettes of other islands, the small lights of boats appearing on the horizon. And below me, my little cottage, its chimney breathing smoke, its window glass glowing gold. I lit the lantern that last evening myself. As the flame caught and the beam began its slow, waking rotation, I stood there watching it for a long while. This light would keep burning after I was gone. The young keeper would light it. Perhaps keepers after him would too. The lighthouse would far outlast me. That night I walked down to the shore one last time. I took off my shoes and stood in the wet sand. The waves came, touched my feet, and pulled back. Came, touched, pulled back. Again and again. I stood there watching for a long time. I wanted to say goodbye, but the words would not come. There was no need to say goodbye to the sea. The sea already knew. And I knew that this sound, the sound of these waves, would always be with me. Wherever I went, whatever city I lived in, whenever I closed my eyes and listened, it would be there. Asterisk now. From far away, I close my eyes. And I hear it. The sound of the waves. The way they come and go. Steady, unhurried, tireless. That sound is always telling me the same thing. Everything passes, but the sea remains. Everything changes, but the rhythm of the waves stays the same. And that was enough. That was always enough. Now you close your eyes too. Hear that sound. The waves coming in, the waves pulling back. First strong, then softer, then only a whisper. Come and go. Come and go. The island is still out there. The lighthouse is still burning. Captain is still gliding on the wind. And you are here, safe and still. The night is deepening. The stars are slowly turning. The lighthouse beam sweeps the dark at its steady pace, every 12 seconds, touching the far horizon. The sea does not sleep. The sea never sleeps. But it will carry you into sleep. Gently, softly, with great care. Sleep now. The waves are here. Everything is exactly where it belongs.